A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain, Chapter 27, Part 2. The Yankee and the King travel incognito. Finally the King said, "When ye know that I meditate a thing inconvenient, or that hath a peril in it, why do you not warn me to cease from that project?" It was a startling question, and a puzzler. I didn't quite know how to take hold of it or what to say, and so, of course, I ended up by saying the natural thing. "But, sire, how can I know what your thoughts are?" The King stopped dead in his tracks and stared at me. "I believed thou wert greater than Merlin, and truly, in magic thou art. But prophecy is greater than magic. Merlin is a prophet." I saw I had made a blunder. I must get back my lost ground. After a deep reflection and careful planning, I said, "Sire, I have been misunderstood. I will explain. There are two kinds of prophecy. One is the gift to foretell things that are but a little way off. The other is the gift to foretell things that are whole ages and centuries away. Which is the mightier gift, do you think?" "Oh, the last most surely." "True. Does Merlin possess it?" "Partly, yes. He foretold mysteries about my birth and future kingship that were 20 years away." "Has he ever gone beyond that?" "He would not claim more, I think." "It is probably his limit. All prophets have their limit. The limit of some of the great prophets has been 100 years. These are few, I ween. There have been two still greater ones whose limit was 400 and 600 years, and one whose limit compassed even 720. Gramercy, it is marvelous. But what are these in comparison with me? They are nothing." "What? Canst thou truly look beyond even so vast a stretch of time as 700 years? My liege, as clear as the vision of an eagle does my prophetic eye penetrate and lay bare the future of this world for nearly 13 centuries and a half." My lad, you should have seen the King's eyes spread slowly open and lift the earth's entire atmosphere as much as an inch. That settled Br'er Merlin. One never had any occasion to prove his facts with these people. All he had to do was to state them. It never occurred to anybody to doubt the statement. "Now then," I continued, "I could work both kinds of prophecy, the long and the short, if I chose to take the trouble to keep in practice, but I seldom exercise any but the long kind, because the other is beneath my dignity. It is properer to Merlin's sort, stump-tail prophets, as we call them in the profession. Of course, I wet up now and then and flirt out a minor prophecy, but not often, hardly ever, in fact. You will remember that there was great talk when you reached the Valley of Holiness about my having prophesied your coming at the very hour of your arrival 2 or 3 days beforehand." "Indeed, yes, I mind it now." "Well, I could have done it as much as 40 times easier, and piled on 1,000 times more detail into the bargain if it had been 500 years away instead of 2 or 3 days. How amazing that it should be so. Yes, a genuine expert can always foretell a thing that is 500 years away easier than he can a thing that's only 500 seconds off. And yet in reason it should clearly be the other way. It should be 500 times as easy to foretell the last as the first, for indeed it is so close by that one uninspired might almost see it. In truth, the law of prophecy doth contradict the likelihoods, most strangely making the difficult easy, and easy difficult. It was a wise head. A peasant's cap was no safe disguise for it. You could know it for a king's under a diving bell if you could hear it work its intellect. I had a new trade now, and plenty of business in it. The king was as hungry to find out everything that was going to happen during the next 13 centuries as if he were expecting to live in them. From that time out, I prophesied myself bald-headed, trying to supply the demand. I have done some indiscreet things in my day, but this thing of playing myself for a prophet was the worst. Still, it had its ameliorations. A prophet doesn't have to have any brains. They are good to have, of course, for the ordinary exigencies of life, but they are no use in professional work. It is the restfulest vocation there is. When the spirit of prophecy comes upon you, you merely take your intellect and lay it off in a cool place for a rest and unship your jaw and leave it alone. It will work itself. The result is prophecy. Every day a knight-errant or so came along, and the sight of them fired the king's martial. Every day a knight-errant or so came along, and the sight of them fired the king's martial spirit every time. He would have forgotten himself, sure, and said something to them in a style of suspicious shade or so above his ostensible degree, and so I always got him well out of the road in time. Then he would stand and look with all his eyes, and a proud light would flash from them as his nostrils would inflate like a war horse's, and I knew he was longing for a brush with them. But about noon of the third day I had stopped in the road to take a precaution which had been suggested by the whip-stroke that had fallen to my share 2 days before, a precaution which I had afterward decided to leave untaken. I was so loath to institute it, but now I had just had a fresh reminder while striding heedlessly along with jaw spread and intellect at rest, for I was prophesying. I stubbed my toe and fell sprawling. I was so pale I couldn't think for a moment. Then I got softly and carefully up and unstrapped my knapsack. I had that dynamite bomb in it, done up in wool in a box. It was a good thing to have along. The time would come when I could do a valuable miracle with it, maybe, but it was a nervous thing to have about me, and I didn't like to ask the king to carry it. Yes, yet I must either throw it away or think up some way to get along with its society. I got it out and slipped it into my scrip, and just then here came a couple of knights. The king stood stately as a statue, gazing toward them, had forgotten himself again, of course, and before I could get a word of warning out, it was time for him to skip, and well, that he did it too. He supposed they would turn aside to avoid trampling a peasant dirt underfoot. When had he ever turned aside himself, or ever had the chance to do it, if a peasant saw him or any other noble knight in time to judiciously save him the trouble? The knights paid no attention to the king at all. It was his place to look out himself, and if he hadn't skipped, he would have been placidly ridden down and laughed at besides. The king was in a flaming fury, and laughed out his challenge and epithets with a most royal vigour. The knights were some little distance by now. They halted, greatly surprised, and turned in their saddles and looked back, as if wondering if it might be worth while to bother with such scum as we. Then they wheeled and started for us. Not a moment must be lost. I started for them. I passed them, a rattling gait, and as I went by I flung out a hair-lifting, soul-scorching, 13-jointed insult, which made the king's effort poor and cheap by comparison. I got it out of the 19th century, where they know how. They had such headway that they were nearly to the king before they could check up. Then, frantic with rage, they stood up their horses on their hind hoofs and whirled them around, and the next moment here they came, breast to breast. I was 70 yards off then, and scrambling up a great boulder at the roadside. When they were within 30 yards of me, they let their long lances droop to a level, depressed their mailed heads, and so, with their horsehair plumes streaming straight out behind, most gallant to see, this lightning express came tearing for me. When they were within 15 yards, I sent that bomb with a sure aim, and it struck the ground just under the horses' noses. Yes, it was a neat thing, very neat, and pretty to see. It resembled a steamboat explosion on the Mississippi, and during the next 15 minutes we stood under a steady drizzle of microscopic fragments of knights and hardware and horseflesh. I say we, for the king joined the audience, of course, as soon as he had got his breath again. There was a hole there which would afford steady work for all the people in that region for some years to come in trying to explain it. I mean, as for filling it up, that service would be comparatively prompt and would fall to the lot of a select few peasants of that seigneury, and they wouldn't get anything for it either. But I explained it to the king myself. I said it was done with a dynamite bomb. This information did him no damage, because it left him as intelligent as he was before. However, it was a noble miracle in his eyes, and was another settler for Merlin. I thought it well enough to explain that this was a miracle of so rare a sort that it couldn't be done except when the atmospheric conditions were just right. Otherwise, he would be encoring it every time we had a good subject, and that would be inconvenient, because I hadn't any more bombs along. So, that was it for chapter 27. Bye-bye till next time with chapter 28, titled Drilling the King.